My daughter-in-law banned me from seeing my grandkids, so I sold the house and car I bought them and kept the money. If you're just tuning in, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, and please show us some love with a like and comment below to let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from all over the world. The smell of Sunday morning coffee still lingered in the kitchen when the phone call that would shatter everything came through. 72-year-old hands trembled as they gripped the receiver, listening to words that cut deeper than any surgeon's blade. After 35 years of pouring love, money, and sleepless nights into raising her son, this was how it would end. Dolores Washington had built her life around family. Every dollar saved from her teaching salary, every sacrifice made working double shifts at the diner after her husband passed, had been for them. She'd watched her son Edwin grow from a shy boy who couldn't tie his shoes into a successful insurance agent with a corner office and a smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo. But success had brought Lucinda into their lives. Beautiful, ambitious Lucinda with her perfectly straightened hair and designer purses that cost more than Dolores' monthly Social Security check. The woman who'd stolen her son's heart and apparently his backbone too. The conversation replayed in her mind like a broken record. "Mama Dell, I'm sorry, but Lucinda thinks it's best if you don't come around anymore. The kids need consistency and your old-fashioned ways are confusing them." The betrayal stung worse than the arthritis in her joints on rainy days. Dolores hung up the phone and walked to her living room, where family photos lined every surface. Pictures of birthday parties, graduations, Christmas mornings. In the corner sat the thank you cards from Edwin and Lucinda when she'd bought them their dream house, a 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch. Next to it, the spare keys to the BMW she'd purchased for Lucinda's birthday last year. Her grandbaby's laughter echoed in her memory. 8-year-old Malik with his gap-toothed grin, and 6-year-old Eunice who called her Granny Dal, and always wanted to help bake cookies. Now, according to their mother, those same children needed protection from their grandmother's love. Something hardened in Dolores' chest as she stared at those keys. The sleepless night stretched endlessly as Dolores paced her small apartment, her slippers wearing thin paths in the carpet. Every creak of the building reminded her of the silence that had replaced her grandchildren's voices. She'd raised Edwin to be better than this, to honor family above all else. Yet here she was, cast aside like yesterday's newspaper. Her neighbor, Mrs. Agnes, knocked softly at dawn, carrying 2 cups of chamomile tea and the wisdom that comes from watching generations rise and fall. "Family problems?" she asked, settling into the worn armchair that had witnessed decades of Dolores' joys and sorrows. "My son's wife has decided I'm not suitable company for my own grandbabies," Dolores said, her voice cracking like autumn leaves. The words tasted bitter, foreign. She'd never imagined having to speak them aloud. Mrs. Agnes's weathered face creased with concern. What did you do to upset her? The question hung in the air like smoke. What had she done? Loved too hard? Cared too much? Last week, when little Eunice had scraped her knee, Dolores had cleaned the wound and kissed it better, just like she'd done for Edwin countless times. Lucinda had snatched the child away, muttering about outdated parenting methods and boundary issues. Or maybe it was when she'd suggested Malik needed more structure, fewer video games, and more time outside. Edwin used to spend hours in her tiny garden, learning to nurture life from soil. But Lucinda had rolled her eyes, calling Dolores' ideas prehistoric. The final straw had been Thanksgiving dinner. Dolores had prepared Edwin's favorite meal, the same recipes passed down from her grandmother, seasoned with love and tradition. But Lucinda had arrived with catered food from an expensive restaurant, dismissing Dolores' cooking as too heavy and unhealthy for the children. The humiliation burned fresh in her memory. Watching her son choose store-bought mac and cheese over her homemade version, seeing her grandbabies pushed away from dishes that had nourished 3 generations. Mrs. Agnes set down her cup with a decisive clink. "Sometimes, dear, people need to learn what they've lost before they can appreciate what they had." Monday morning brought clarity with the sunrise. Dolores dressed carefully in her navy blue suit, the one she'd worn to Edwin college graduation, and made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to her lawyer, Harold Brooks, who'd handled her husband's estate and knew the family history better than most. "Harold, I need to discuss some property matters," she said, her voice steady as steel. "The house on Maple Street and that BMW I purchased for my daughter-in-law. I want to understand my options." Harold's pause spoke volumes. In 40 years of practice, he'd seen families tear themselves apart over money, love, and pride. Dolores, are you sure about this? Family disputes can get messy. They already are messy, Harold. I just want to clean them up. The second call was to her financial advisor, Jeanette Ellison, a sharp woman who'd grown up in the same neighborhood and understood the value of hard-earned money. Pat, I need to liquidate some assets. Quickly. The third call was the hardest, to Edwin voicemail, since he was apparently too busy to answer his mother's calls anymore. Baby, this is Mama. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. Maybe Lucinda is right. Maybe it's time for me to step back and let y'all handle things on your own. Take care of yourself. By noon, the legal paperwork was in motion. The house deed clearly showed Dolores Washington as the sole owner. She'd bought it outright as a gift, never transferring ownership. The BMW's title bore her name in bold letters. Gifts given freely but never legally transferred. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lucinda. Thank you for understanding, Mama Delaware. This is what's best for everyone. Dolores stared at the message, remembering when Lucinda used to call her Mom, and thank her with tears in her eyes for accepting her into the family. That woman seemed like a stranger now, replaced by someone who saw love as competition and generosity as control. She typed back, "You're absolutely right, sweetheart. It is what's best." But her definition of best might be different than Lucinda's. 3 days of silence stretched like an eternity. Dolores had expected at least a call from Edwin, some attempt at reconciliation, but her phone remained stubbornly quiet. Meanwhile, Harold worked his legal magic, and Jeanette began the process of converting gifts back into liquid assets. The first crack in Lucinda's confidence came Thursday afternoon. Dolores was tending her small herb garden when she heard raised voices from the apartment next door. Mrs. Agnes was on her balcony, pretending to water plants while clearly eavesdropping on the conversation echoing from the courtyard below. "What do you mean the bank is asking questions about the mortgage?" Edwin's voice carried the strain of a man whose world was shifting beneath his feet. Lucinda's response was sharp, cutting through the afternoon air like a blade. "They said something about the deed being reviewed. It doesn't make sense. Your mother gave us this house free and clear." "Maybe I should call her," Edwin suggested, and Dolores felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "Absolutely not," Lucinda snapped. "We agreed she's toxic for our family. Whatever this is, we'll handle it ourselves." Mrs. Agnes caught Dolores' eye and shook her head sadly. They both understood what was happening. Pride was about to meet reality, and the collision wouldn't be pretty. That evening, Dolores received an unexpected visitor. 8-year-old Malik stood at her door, having somehow slipped away from home. His school backpack hung from thin shoulders, and his eyes held the confusion of a child caught between warring adults. "Granny Del, why can't I see you anymore?" he asked, wrapping his small arms around her waist. "Did I do something bad?" Dolores' heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She held her grandson close, breathing in the scent of his grape-flavored shampoo and feeling the rapid beat of his innocent heart. "Oh baby, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense, even to other grown-ups." "Mama said you were being mean to her," Malik whispered against her shoulder. The accusation hung between them, a child's interpretation of adult warfare. Dolores had never spoken an unkind word about Lucinda in front of the children, had always supported their mother's decisions, even when she disagreed. "What do you think, Malik? Was Granny Del ever mean to you?" He pulled back, his young face serious with thought. "No, Granny Delaware. You always make my favorite cookies and let me help in the garden. Mama just seems angry all the time now." The BMW disappeared first. Lucinda discovered it missing from their driveway on Friday morning, along with a polite note from the towing company explaining that the vehicle's registered owner had requested its return. Dolores watched from Mrs. Agnes's window as her daughter-in-law stood in her silk robe, gesturing wildly at the empty space where her luxury car had been. Edwin rushed home from work, his face a mask of confusion and growing anger. The neighbors gathered on porches and behind curtains, sensing drama unfolding like a soap opera in real time. This was the kind of spectacle that would be discussed over coffee and dinner tables for months to come. "She can't just take the car back." Lucinda's voice carried across the neighborhood, shrill with disbelief. "It was a gift. We have children to think about." But Harold had done his homework thoroughly. Gifts of such magnitude, when not properly transferred through legal documentation, remained the property of the giver. The BMW had been repossessed legally, efficiently, and without recourse. Dolores felt no satisfaction in her daughter-in-law's distress, only a deep sadness that it had come to this. She'd hoped, foolishly perhaps, that losing the car might prompt a phone call, an attempt at reconciliation. Instead, Edwin stood in his driveway looking like a man who'd discovered his entire life was built on shifting sand. The house would be next, but Harold had advised patience. Let them digest this first shock, he'd counseled. Understanding comes in stages, especially when pride is involved. That evening, Dolores prepared Malik's favorite chocolate chip cookies, the recipe she'd learned from her own grandmother decades ago. She packaged them carefully in a tin decorated with bright balloons along with a note, "For my sweet boy. Love never goes away even when people try to hide it. Granny Delaware." She left the tin on their front porch after dark, like a fairy godmother working in reverse. Instead of granting wishes, she was teaching lessons about consequences and the true value of family. Saturday brought her first direct contact with Edwin in a week. His call came at dawn, waking her from restless dreams filled with childhood memories and adult regrets. "Mama, we need to talk." His voice carried exhaustion and something else. The first hint of understanding that his mother wasn't the villain in this story. The coffee shop where they'd agreed to meet held 30 years of memories. First dates Edwin had nervously asked advice about, college graduation celebrations, conversations about his father's death. Now it would host what might be their last meaningful exchange as mother and son. Edwin looked older than his 35 years as he slumped into the familiar booth. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect insurance salesman appearance was wrinkled, disheveled. The man who'd always been meticulous about his image now looked like someone who'd forgotten how to care. "Lucinda says you stole her car," he began, his voice lacking conviction. Even as he spoke the words, something in his expression suggested he knew better. Dolores stirred her coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into golden patterns. "Is that what she told you? That I stole a car I bought with my own money, put in my own name, and gave as a gift that was never legally transferred?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Edwin had always been smart, too smart not to understand the implications of his mother's words. His shoulders sagged as reality settled over him like a heavy blanket. "She's talking about calling the police," he said weakly. "Harold Brooks is handling the legal aspects. Your wife is welcome to involve law enforcement if she believes a crime has been committed." Dolores' voice remained steady, professional. This wasn't the time for maternal comfort. This was a business negotiation disguised as a family conversation. Edwin ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she remembered from his troubled teenage years. "Mama, I don't understand what's happening. Last week we were family, and now? Last week your wife decided I was unsuitable company for my own grandbabies," Dolores interrupted gently. "She said my old-fashioned ways were confusing them, that they needed consistency. I'm simply providing that consistency by removing myself entirely from the equation." The words hit him like physical blows. For the first time since this nightmare began, Edwin seemed to really see his mother, not as an obstacle to his wife's happiness, but as the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities she'd never had. "The house?" he asked quietly, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Will be going on the market next week. Harold assures me it should sell quickly in this neighborhood." Edwin's face went white. "Mama, we can't afford the mortgage payments without, we thought." "You thought wrong, baby. You both did." The for sale sign appeared on Maple Street like a thunderclap on a clear day. Dolores had chosen the most aggressive real estate agent in the city, a woman known for quick sales and no-nonsense negotiations. By Tuesday afternoon, 3 potential buyers had scheduled showings. Lucinda's reaction was nuclear. She stormed into Dolores' apartment building, her designer heels clicking against linoleum floors like castanets announcing a war dance. Mrs. Agnes later described the sound as, like angry horses in a crystal shop. "You can't do this." Lucinda's voice echoed through the hallway, carrying the hysteria of someone whose perfect world was crumbling. "We have children. Where are we supposed to live?" Dolores opened her door calmly, dressed in her church clothes and wearing the pearls her husband had given her for their 20th anniversary. If this was going to be their final confrontation, she would meet it with dignity. "You told my son that I was no longer welcome in your lives," she said quietly. "I'm simply respecting that decision by removing myself completely. That includes any financial entanglements that might require future contact." This is extortion. Lucinda's perfectly applied makeup was beginning to smudge, revealing the panic beneath her polished exterior. "You're trying to force us to let you see the kids." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Dolores felt the eyes of her neighbors, the weight of judgment from people who'd watched this family drama unfold. Some would see a bitter old woman wielding money like a weapon. Others would recognize a grandmother pushed beyond her breaking point. "I'm not trying to force anything," Dolores replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd taught difficult children for 3 decades. "I'm simply exercising my rights as the legal owner of property I purchased with money I earned through 40 years of work." Lucinda's composure finally cracked completely. Fine. You want to see the kids? You can see them. Just stop this madness." But it was too late for bargaining. Dolores had crossed a bridge that couldn't be uncrossed, had learned truths about her family that couldn't be unlearned. The woman standing before her wasn't offering reconciliation. She was offering terms of surrender, and only because her back was against the wall. "I appreciate the offer," Dolores said softly, "but we both know you don't mean it. You'll let me visit until the crisis passes, then find new reasons to push me away. I'm too old for games, Lucinda. And my grandbabies deserve better than being used as bargaining chips." The neighborhood grapevine worked faster than social media. By Wednesday morning, everyone knew about the Washington family drama, and opinions were split down generational lines. The older residents, many of whom remembered when Dolores had worked double shifts to pay for Edwin college, stood firmly in her corner. The younger families, some dealing with their own in-law issues, saw a cautionary tale about boundaries and modern family dynamics. But it was Malik who became the catalyst for unexpected change. The 8-year-old had been listening to adult conversations with the acute attention children reserve for things they're not supposed to understand. When his teacher, Mrs. Carter, noticed his distraction during math class, he finally broke down. "My mama and granny are fighting, and now we might have to move away from my school and my friends," he sobbed into her shoulder during recess. "I don't want to leave. I want my granny back." Mrs. Carter had taught 3 generations of the same families. She remembered Edwin as a shy boy who'd bloomed under his mother's encouragement, and she'd watched Dolores at every school event, every parent conference, every Christmas pageant. The idea that this devoted grandmother was somehow harmful to her grandchildren struck her as absurd. That afternoon, she made a phone call that would change everything. "Mrs. Washington? This is Elena Carter from Lincoln Elementary. I think we need to talk about Malik. He's very upset about the family situation, and frankly, so am I." The teacher's words carried the weight of professional observation and personal concern. "In 20 years of education, I've never seen a more devoted grandmother. What Lucinda is claiming about your influence on the children, it doesn't match what I observe when you're all together." Dolores felt tears threatening for the first time since this nightmare began. "I appreciate that, Elena, but the damage is done. They've made their choice." "Have they?" "Because Edwin called the school this morning asking about transferring the children. He sounded desperate, not decisive. Maybe it's time someone reminded him what kind of mother raised him." That evening, Elena Carter did something unprecedented in her teaching career. She made house calls to both Edwin and Dolores, carrying with her a folder of observations, school records, and photographs spanning 8 years of Malik's education. Every image showed the same thing: a little boy whose face lit up whenever his grandmother appeared. "This is what love looks like, Edwin," she said, spreading the photos across his kitchen table while Lucinda sulked in the corner. "And you're about to destroy it over pride and misguided loyalty." The teacher's words hit like arrows, finding their target, each one carrying the weight of truth Edwin had been trying to ignore. The house sold in 48 hours to a cash buyer who appreciated the neighborhood's charm and the property's potential. Dolores accepted the offer immediately, despite Harold's suggestion that they could probably get more money by waiting. Time was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every day that passed made reconciliation more difficult, pride more entrenched. Edwin received the news through his real estate agent, a friend who'd handled the original purchase when times were happier. The call came during a particularly difficult morning. Eunice had woken up crying for Granny Dal. Malik had refused to eat breakfast, and Lucinda was alternating between rage and panic as their financial reality became clear. "Your mother isn't playing games, Edwin," the agent said bluntly. "She's already accepted an offer and closing is scheduled for next week. You've got 10 days to figure out your next move. 10 days to find a new home, secure financing, and explain to his children why their world was falling apart. 10 days to confront the fact that his mother, the woman who'd never made an idle threat in her life, had followed through on every warning he'd ignored." Lucinda's solution was predictably dramatic. "We'll fight it in court. Claim elder abuse, manipulation, something. She can't just destroy our lives because she's having a temper tantrum." But Edwin was beginning to see the situation through different eyes. His mother's actions weren't those of a petulant child throwing a tantrum. They were the measured responses of a woman who'd been pushed beyond her breaking point by people who'd taken her love for granted. The turning point came when 6-year-old Eunice, in the innocent way of children, asked the question that cut through every justification and excuse. "Daddy, why doesn't Granny Dal love us anymore?" The words hit Edwin like a physical blow. How could he explain that their grandmother loved them more than life itself? So much that she was willing to become the villain in their story rather than enable the people who were teaching them that love was conditional. That night, while Lucinda made frantic phone calls to lawyers who kept explaining why her case was hopeless, Edwin sat in his children's room and really looked around. The hand-knitted blankets on each bed, made by their grandmother's arthritic fingers. The family photos where Dolores appeared in every important moment. The toys, clothes, and memories funded by a woman who'd lived modestly so they could live well. For the first time in months, Edwin Washington began to think like the son his mother had raised rather than the husband his wife had trained. Friday brought an unexpected revelation that changed everything. Dolores was packing the last of her husband's books when she discovered a letter she'd never seen before, tucked inside his favorite Bible. The handwriting was his, but the date was recent. Just weeks before Lucinda had banned her from seeing the grandchildren. "My dearest Dolores," it began, "if you're reading this, then the situation with Lucinda has probably gotten worse. I need you to know what I overheard at Malik's birthday party, what I wanted to tell you but couldn't bring myself to say while I was alive." Her hands trembled as she read her late husband's words, his gentle spirit reaching across time to deliver a truth that would shatter her understanding of everything that had happened. "Lucinda was talking to her sister in the kitchen and they didn't know I was there. She said she was tired of pretending to be grateful to you, tired of having to include you in everything. Her exact words were, 'Once the old lady dies, everything she has will come to Edwin anyway. Why should we have to kiss her ass for things that will eventually be ours?'" The letter continued, describing conversations her husband had witnessed, plans Lucinda had made, and the gradual campaign to isolate Dolores from her son and grandchildren. It wasn't about parenting styles or family boundaries. It was about inheritance, control, and a daughter-in-law who saw her mother-in-law as an obstacle to complete ownership of Edwin and his affections. "I didn't tell you because I hoped I was wrong, hoped she would grow into the love our family deserved. But if you're reading this, then my silence was a mistake. Don't let them make you doubt your worth, Dolores. You are the heart of this family and they know it." The letter was dated and signed, witnessed by their pastor who'd apparently helped her husband write it during one of his final visits. It was legal documentation of conversations that proved Lucinda's motivations had never been about protecting the children. They'd been about securing her financial future. Harold Brooks read the letter with the careful attention of a man who'd seen every form of family greed imaginable. "This changes things, Dolores. This gives us leverage if you want to use it." But Dolores wasn't thinking about the family meeting was Dolores' idea, but she let Harold arrange it in his office. Neutral ground where emotions couldn't run as high and legal consequences felt more real. Edwin arrived looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. Lucinda came dressed for battle in her sharpest business suit, every inch the professional woman who wasn't about to be intimidated by an elderly lady and her small-town lawyer. The letter lay on Harold's mahogany desk like evidence in a murder trial. Dolores watched her daughter-in-law's face as Harold read her husband's words aloud, documenting conversations that revealed the true nature of Lucinda's campaign against her. "This is hearsay," Lucinda said when Harold finished, but her voice lacked its usual confident edge. "A dead man's accusations prove nothing." "Actually," Harold replied smoothly, Pastor Samuel is very much alive and willing to testify about helping Robert write this letter. He's also prepared to discuss the conversations he witnessed at church functions, where you made similar statements about your mother-in-law being in the way of your family's independence. Edwin stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Lucinda, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't spend years planning to push my mother out of our lives. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucinda's perfectly composed mask finally slipped, revealing the calculation beneath her beauty. Your mother was smothering us, Edwin. Everything had to be her way, her traditions, her approval. When were we going to be allowed to be our own family? She bought us a house, Edwin said quietly. She bought you a car. He babysat whenever we needed time alone. She never interfered with your decisions about the kids, even when she disagreed. What exactly was she doing that was so terrible? Existing. Lucinda exploded, her composure finally shattering completely. She was always there, always watching, always making me feel like a guest in my own life. Do you know how hard it is to compete with a saint? The admission hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had finally burned through its concealment. Edwin's face went through a series of emotions: shock, understanding, and finally, a deep sadness that spoke of dreams dying and scales falling from his eyes. You were never competing with her, he whispered. She was trying to love you. Dolores felt her heart breaking not for herself, but for the young woman whose insecurity had poisoned what could have been a beautiful relationship. I was never trying to replace you, Lucinda. I was trying to support you. Well, it's too late now, Lucinda snapped, her vulnerability quickly replaced by defensive anger. You've made your point. You win. But Dolores Washington hadn't been fighting to win. She'd been fighting to understand, and now she finally did. The solution came from an unexpected source. Pastor Samuel, who'd been quietly counseling the family through this crisis, suggested something that surprised everyone. Mediation through the church's family counseling program, led by someone who understood both generational differences and the complexities of modern families. Dr. Amara Johnson was a family therapist who specialized in multi-generational conflicts within African American families. She'd grown up watching her own grandmother clash with her mother over child-rearing approaches, and she understood how cultural changes could create chasms between people who loved each other deeply. The real issue here isn't money or boundaries, she explained during their first session together. It's fear. Lucinda is afraid of being judged and found lacking. Edwin is afraid of choosing between the two most important women in his life. And Dolores is afraid of being forgotten by the family she built her entire life around. The therapy sessions were painful, honest, and sometimes brutal. Lucinda admitted her insecurities about never feeling good enough, about growing up poor and always feeling like an outsider in middle-class spaces. Dolores acknowledged that her strong personality and firm opinions could sometimes feel overwhelming to a young woman still finding her confidence. Edwin faced the hardest truth of all. He'd failed to protect both women by trying to avoid conflict instead of addressing it directly. His silence had allowed resentment to fester until it poisoned everything they'd built together. The breakthrough came when Eunice, now allowed to visit her grandmother again under supervised conditions, innocently asked why all the grown-ups had been so sad. I thought families were supposed to love each other even when they're mad, she said, looking between the adults with 6-year-old wisdom. Out of the mouths of babes came the simple truth they'd all lost sight of. Love doesn't disappear because of disagreements, and family means figuring out how to stay connected even when it's difficult. The house sale couldn't be undone, but Dolores used the proceeds to establish a trust fund for her grandchildren's education. Money that would be managed jointly by herself and Edwin, requiring them to maintain communication and cooperation for the next decade. The BMW remained sold, but Lucinda eventually admitted she'd never really wanted such an expensive car. She'd just been afraid to seem ungrateful by refusing such a generous gift. Most importantly, they established new boundaries that respected everyone's needs: regular but scheduled visits, honest communication about concerns, and a commitment to putting the children's well-being above adult pride. 6 months after the crisis that nearly destroyed their family, Dolores Washington stood in the kitchen of Edwin and Lucinda's new home, a modest 3-bedroom they could actually afford, teaching her granddaughter how to make biscuits from scratch. The house was smaller than the Maple Street mansion, but it felt more like home because it belonged to them, not to guilt or obligation. Lucinda worked nearby, genuinely trying to learn recipes that connected her children to their heritage. The relationship between the two women would never be what it might have been if they'd started differently, but it was honest now, built on understanding rather than pretense. "Granny Dell," Malik asked, carefully measuring flour under her watchful eye, "why did everybody get so mad at each other?" It was a question Dolores had pondered through many sleepless nights. "Sometimes, baby, when people love each other very much, they get scared of losing that love. And when we're scared, we don't always make the best decisions." Edwin appeared in the doorway, watching 3 generations of his family work together in the easy rhythm they'd found again. The man who'd nearly lost everything had learned to value what he had rather than taking it for granted. "The real estate agent called," he announced. "Our first house payment went through without any problems." It was a small milestone, but it represented something larger. Independence earned rather than given, responsibility accepted rather than avoided, and the kind of grown-up relationship between parent and child that honors both parties' dignity. Dolores smiled, remembering the scared young woman who'd married her son years ago and the bitter, desperate woman who'd tried to erase her from their lives. Neither version had been the real Lucinda, just faces she'd worn to hide her fear of not being enough. "You know," Dolores said, dusting flour from her hands, "I think your mama's biscuits are going to be even better than mine. She's got steadier hands." It was a small compliment, but Lucinda's face lit up like sunrise. Some gifts can't be bought or sold. They can only be given freely, received gratefully, and cherished forever. Outside, neighbors walked past the little house with its front porch swing and thriving garden, unaware of the drama that had played out here. To them, it looked like any other family enjoying a peaceful Saturday afternoon. And maybe that's exactly what it was. Proof that sometimes the most important victories are the quiet ones, measured in homemade biscuits and children's laughter rather than grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. The Washington family had learned that love isn't about ownership or control. It's about creating space for each other to grow, forgive, and begin again. And sometimes that's the most valuable inheritance of all. Thanks for watching. Give us a like if you liked the video and share with us in the comments what you think about this lovely tale. We always enjoy reading your comments.